The night howled like it wanted to tear the world apart. The Bitterroot Mountains were swallowed in snow, the kind that buried roads, homes, and secrets alike. Jack Vance tightened his coat and stared through the frosted window of his cabin. Beyond the glass, the storm erased everything: trees, sky, even the horizon. It was as if the mountain itself had vanished, leaving only the wind and his own heartbeat. He should have felt safe here. After all, that was the point. No neighbors, no noise, no reminders. But tonight, peace felt more like a prison. The silence didn't comfort him. It stared back. Jack turned away from the window. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows across his face and hands. His hands scarred, steady, capable of violence, capable of saving lives. He used to be a Marine. Now he was just a man trying to outlive the war inside his head. The wind rose to a roar, rattling the shutters. Jack moved to the door and locked it tight, though no one sane would be out in this storm. Still, a tremor ran through him. Something was wrong, not outside, but in the air. The kind of wrong you didn't hear but felt deep in the bones. Then he heard it. Faint at first, a scraping sound. Not the wind. Not the trees. Something alive. Jack froze. There it was again, scrape. Whine. Scrape. A low, aching cry just outside the door. He grabbed his rifle from the rack and moved with silent precision. Slowly, carefully, he unlatched the door and cracked it open. A wall of snow hit him in the face. Then a shape slumped forward, collapsing through the threshold. A dog. Jack dropped to one knee. It was a German shepherd, heavy-coated and half-frozen blood in its fur. It didn't growl, it didn't move, it just collapsed. Jack pulled the animal inside, slammed the door shut behind them, and dragged the dog to the fire. Its sides heaved, its breathing was shallow. A deep gash across its flank rope burns on the legs. This wasn't some stray caught in the storm. Someone had done this. "Goddamn," Jack muttered. "Who did this to you?" The dog opened its eyes. Amber. Haunted. Alive. Jack stared into those eyes, and something stirred in him: familiarity. Recognition. He had seen that same stare in men who crawled through war zones and came out the other side shattered, but breathing. "You made it through the storm," Jack said quietly. "That counts for something." He moved fast, cleaned the wound, stitched it, wrapped the legs. The dog didn't resist. It lay there with quiet trust, its body twitching only when Jack hit a sore spot. When he finished, Jack leaned back and exhaled. The storm still howled outside, but in here there was a strange kind of calm. The fire warmed the dog's battered frame. Its breathing evened out. "Guess you're stuck with me tonight," Jack said. He tossed a blanket over the animal and sat down across from it. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same. The room didn't feel empty anymore. Just quiet. Jack poured himself a drink and studied the dog again. It was sleeping, but not deeply. Muscles twitched. The ears flicked. As if even in sleep it couldn't let its guard down. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Jack whispered. The dog stirred. Its eyes opened again. Watching him. Jack smirked. "What you want to name?" He studied the dog, its lean, muscular body, the cuts, the discipline. It didn't move like a stray. It moved like it had been trained. Raised for something more than fetch. Ranger Jack said. "Yeah, you look like a ranger." The dog's ear twitched. Then faintly its tail thumped once against the floor. Jack blinked. No way. He chuckled softly, and leaned back. All right then. Ranger it is. Hours passed. Jack drifted off in the chair, lulled by the fire and the sound of the storm. He woke with a start. Ranger was up, staring at the window, frozen. Jack stood slowly. What is it? No sound outside. No movement. Just snow and trees. But Ranger didn't move. Eyes fixed. Tail stiff. Muscles locked. Jack stepped beside him and followed his gaze. Nothing. Still. Something gnawed at the back of Jack's mind. A feeling he hadn't had in years, not since combat. Something was watching. You're not just any dog, are you? Jack whispered. Ranger didn't flinch. The next morning, the storm broke. Blue sky stretched across the snow-covered land. Jack opened the cabin door and stepped out into a world that looked untouched. Ranger stood beside him, breathing slow, deliberate. Then the dog walked to the edge of the porch and stared into the trees again. Same direction. Same alert posture. Same eerie stillness. Jack felt the pull now, too. Something was out there. You're not planning on going back out there, are you? Ranger gave a low, soft whine. Jack exhaled. You're a mystery, Ranger. But it wasn't just curiosity that stirred in him. It was instinct. Purpose. Whatever this dog had dragged itself through the storm to escape or find was still waiting. And maybe, just maybe, so was Jack. That dog didn't crawl through a blizzard just to die on my porch. Jack said it out loud the next morning, standing at the edge of the porch, watching Ranger stare into the trees like they owed him an answer. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp silence that made everything feel sharper, more fragile. Snow weighed down the pines, blanketed the trails, and softened the jagged edges of the world. But Ranger's body language was taut, ears uptail, rigid eyes locked. He hadn't moved from that spot since sunrise. Jack rubbed his hands together more from habit than cold. You're not letting this go, huh? Ranger didn't look back, just stayed locked on whatever was out there or whatever had been. Jack stepped off the porch into knee-deep snow and followed Ranger's gaze. Nothing moved. No wind. No birds. Just silence and trees. Still, that feeling from last night lingered, that prickling awareness, like something was watching, waiting. Let's see what you're trying to tell me. He trudged back into the cabin and returned with his boots, fully laced rifle slung over his shoulder, a pack on his back. If Ranger wanted to lead, Jack would follow for now. He didn't believe in coincidence, not after everything he'd seen. That dog hadn't stumbled out of nowhere. Something drove it. He stepped down into the snow again. Lead on, soldier. Ranger moved without hesitation, angling toward the tree line, nose low to the ground. His gait was slow, deliberate, not aimless. Jack followed at a distance, watching the way Ranger's paws pressed carefully into the snow. They were tracking. For the first few hundred yards, there was nothing. Just endless snow and dead silence. Jack's breath fogged in the cold air, each step crunching softly. The deeper they went, the thicker the forest grew. Old pines leaned in like sentries. Ranger stopped occasionally to sniff at a spot, ears twitching, before continuing. They reached a small ravine. Jack slid down behind the dog boots, scraping ice, and paused at the bottom. Ranger was sniffing near a broken tree limb. Jack stepped closer and saw the blood. Just a few drops frozen black against the snow. Not from last night. Older. He knelt and traced the trail. It led west, deeper into the woods. Ranger didn't wait. He was already moving again, more energized now, like he'd locked onto something important. Jack felt the familiar pull of adrenaline coil through him. His body remembered this feeling, the hunt, the unknown. The danger coiled just out of sight. A mile in, they came across the remnants of a fire pit, buried under snow but unmistakable. Charcoal. A burned tin can. Someone had camped here, and recently. Ranger circled the site, sniffed furiously, then let out a short bark. Jack stood still watching him, then scanned the area. Boot prints half filled by snow led away from the site. Not animal, human. A single set. Heavy tread. "This where you came from?" Jack asked. Ranger didn't respond. He was already moving again. They followed the trail for another half hour. Jack's legs ached from pushing through the drifts. The cold chewed at his cheeks and fingers. But he didn't stop. Something about this wasn't just a rescue anymore. It felt like a mission. Like the mountain was hiding something, and this dog was the only one willing to point a finger. Then Ranger stopped. They stood at the edge of a clearing. On the far side, half hidden behind trees and snow, sat a structure. Old. Weathered. A cabin. Not like Jack's, this one looked forgotten. No smoke from the chimney. Shutters missing. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. But Ranger's posture changed. Not tense, alert. Familiar. He recognized the place. Jack narrowed his eyes. "You've been here before." Ranger stepped forward cautiously. Jack followed, rifle lowered but ready. They approached the porch. Boards creaked underfoot. Jack knocked on the door. Nothing. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. He pushed the door gently. It opened with a groan. Inside the cabin was dim lit only by filtered sunlight through a cracked window. Dust hung in the air. The room smelled of mildew smoke and something else, something metallic. Blood. Jack stepped inside, heart thudding. Ranger moved past him, nose in the air. The space was small, just a main room with a stove, a cot, and a table. Signs of life were faint, but present a blanket crumpled in the corner, a broken coffee mug on the floor, and near the wall scratches. Deep, desperate, like someone had clawed at the wood. Then Jack saw it. On the wall beside the cot, etched into the wood with a knife or nail, were the words, "He said he'd come back." "I don't believe him." Ranger whined and moved to the cot, pawing at the blanket. Jack crossed the room and found more blood dried into the fabric. His stomach turned. "Someone was held here," he said aloud, mostly to himself. "Left here." Ranger paced back to the door and looked back at him, eyes sharp. Then he barked once, sharply. "You want me to follow?" Jack muttered. He gave the room one last look, committing every detail to memory. Then he stepped back into the cold. Ranger led them past the cabin, around a grove of trees, and down a narrow trail Jack never would have spotted on his own. Less than a quarter-mile later, they stopped again. This time the scent hit Jack before the sight did. Burned wood. Smoke. He pushed through a thicket and found the remains of a second structure, no more than charred boards and collapsed walls. It had burned recently, still warm under the snow. Ranger sniffed at the edges, whined, then barked again. His whole body shook with urgency. Jack moved closer and knelt by a scorched beam. There was something trapped underneath fabric, maybe. He brushed it aside, found what looked like a coat sleeve. Inside the coat, a metal locket. He picked it up, carefully opened it. Inside were two photos, faded black and white portraits of a young woman and a man in uniform. His grandfather's face stared back at him. Jack froze. What the hell is going on? He turned to Ranger, who stared at him with something like expectation, as if the dog had known, had brought him here for this very reason. Everything was shifting too fast, too surreal. But the message was clear now. This wasn't random. Ranger had a story to tell, and Jack was part of it. They weren't just chasing ghosts. They were digging them up. He's not looking back at the past. He's pointing to the present. The words slipped from Jack's mouth before he realized he was speaking them aloud. Ranger was pacing in tight, urgent circles at the edge of the smoldering ruins, nose to the ground, tail, low ears flicking like antennae tuned to something Jack couldn't yet hear. The coat, the locket, the scorched earth, it had all pointed backward. A memory. A connection to his grandfather. But Ranger wasn't done. The dog's body radiated tension, not grief. He wasn't mourning. He was guiding. Jack stood brushing soot from his hands and looked around. The snow around the burn site had melted and refrozen slick and treacherous. Tracks, human ones, looped in from the east and veered toward the tree line. They were recent and deliberate. Whoever had been here either set that fire or ran from it. Ranger gave a sharp bark, then bolted into the trees. "Damn it, hold up!" Jack called, snatching up his pack and rifle before taking off after him. Branches slapped his face. Snow snagged his boots. The forest tightened around him like a noose as they pushed through a tangle of pine and ice. He caught glimpses of Ranger's dark shape weaving through the white, swift, ghost-like, focused. Jack didn't know how far they ran, maybe a half-mile, maybe more, but the world seemed to hold its breath around them. The sounds of the forest were muted, distant, like everything had gone still to watch what came next. Then Ranger stopped. Jack stumbled into a clearing and skidded to a halt beside him. Before them stood another cabin, this one smaller than the others, older, hidden in the trees, like it was ashamed to be found. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow, but smoke curled from a crooked chimney. Someone was alive inside. Jack reached for his rifle, not aiming, just ready. Ranger crept forward low to the ground, ears pinned, but not afraid, alert. They moved slowly toward the front porch. The windows were boarded up, the door chained from the outside. That struck Jack as wrong. Very wrong. No one chains a door from the outside unless they want someone to stay in. He circled the cabin, checking for other exits. Nothing. Back at the front, he stepped closer and pressed his ear to the wood. A sound. Faint. A rasping cough, dry and shallow. Then words. Fragile, nearly lost. "Help." Jack didn't hesitate. He yanked at the chain, tested the lock. Too tight to break by hand. "Step back, Ranger." He took his rifle, aimed at the latch, and fired. The shot echoed like thunder in the valley. The chain snapped. Jack shoved the door open. The smell hit him first, sour sweat, rot, fear. Then his eyes adjusted to the gloom, and he saw her. A woman, frail and sunken, lay crumpled in the corner. Wrists bound, lips, cracked skin like paper. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound, dazed and barely human. Ranger rushed to her side and began licking her face gently. Her cracked lips curled into the ghost of a smile. "Radar," she whispered. Jack's breath caught. Ranger Radar whined softly, nuzzling her. The connection was undeniable. This was his person. Jack dropped to his knees beside them. "Ma'am, I'm here to help. I'm Jack Vance. Can you hear me?" She nodded slowly. "He said no one would come. But I prayed." He pulled out a canteen and carefully tipped water to her lips. She drank greedily, then coughed. Jack tore the blanket from his pack and wrapped it around her frail frame. "What's your name, Eleanor?" she rasped. "Ellie Morgan." Who did this to you, Ellie? Her eyes went distant. My nephew. Caleb. He wants the land. Said I was in the way. Jack clenched his jaw. How long have you been here? I don't know. Days. Maybe more. He used to bring food. Then he stopped. I think he meant for the fire to be the end of me. Jack's stomach twisted. That fire wasn't just a message, it was a cover-up. He stood quickly. We need to get you out of here. No. Ellie gasped, clutching his wrist with surprising strength. Wait. There's a box. My papers. It proves I own this land. It's under the floorboard under the bed. Jack moved to the rusted bed frame, pried up the warped boards, and pulled out a small, weathered tin box. Inside were old documents, deeds, maps, letters, some signed with a name that sent a chill through him. David Vance, his grandfather. He stared at the signature, the loopy D, the confident Valmu. This wasn't just about Ellie. This wasn't just about land. This was personal. He shoved the papers into his pack. Okay, we're getting out. He lifted Ellie carefully, surprised again by how light she was. Ranger walked beside them as Jack carried her through the trees, retracing their path back to the burn site. Snow had started falling again, gentle and slow like ash. Hold on, Ellie, Jack muttered. You've come too far to give up now. When they reached the burned cabin, Jack laid Ellie beneath the partial shelter of the porch and pulled out a flare gun from his pack. He aimed high and fired. The red signal burned through the sky. Minutes passed. Then a voice cracked through the static of his handheld radio. Unidentified distress flare, this is Clearwater County Search and Rescue. Do you copy? Jack pressed the button. This is Jack Vance. I have a woman elderly injured, possibly hypothermic. Coordinates approximately 47.1 north, 15.4 west. We need immediate extraction. Roger that, Vance. Chopper inbound. He turned back to Ellie, who had drifted into a half-sleep. Ranger lay beside her head, resting on her leg, eyes never closing. Jack sat beside them, rifle across his knees, mind racing. Everything had changed. What started as a rescue had become something else, something buried in blood and inheritance and secrets that refused to stay dead. They didn't bury the truth. They built their lives on top of it. Jack sat alone in the cabin, the box of documents Ellie had nearly died to protect splayed across the kitchen table. The kettle on the stove hissed low and steady, but he'd long since forgotten it. Outside, snow dusted the clearing in a soft, silent fall. Ranger lay by the fire watching him, always watching, as if he knew what the papers would reveal before Jack did. He'd seen his grandfather's signature in the first layer of records, land deeds correspondence, a few legal forms that connected the Vance family to the Bitterroot territory. But what lay underneath was worse. Letters written in anger, accounts of threats, and one folded map with the corner burned off, marked with both family names, Vance. Morgan Boundary Dispute, 1979. Jack leaned back in his chair, chest tight. His grandfather hadn't just known the Morgans. He'd tried to take everything from them. They didn't bury the truth, Jack muttered. They built their lives on top of it. And Ellie, chained up and left to die, had nearly become just another thing to hide. He thumbed through one of the older envelopes. The ink was faded, but the message was clear. David, you said you'd handle it. If Ellie finds out about the original line, it's over. We need to move fast. You owe me that much after what we did. Croft. Jack's blood went cold. The name hit like a hammer to the chest. Croft was a name his grandfather used to say like a threat. Garrett Croft had been a foreman, a war buddy, a fixer, whatever Jack's grandfather needed at the time. Jack had assumed the man died years ago. But what if he didn't? What if Caleb Morgan was just the tip of this rotten iceberg? He gathered the documents carefully, refolded the map, and stuffed them into a waterproof bag. Then he turned to Ranger. "Get your legs under you, soldier. We've got another trail to follow." Ranger stood instantly. They left the cabin before sunrise. Jack's plan was simple: get back to Ellie, get her statement, and use the evidence to bring heat down on Caleb and anyone else connected. But halfway down the mountain road, a detour changed everything. Parked halfway in a ditch was a truck, Caleb's unmistakably, and the driver's side door was wide open. Snow was building up inside. No sign of Caleb. Jack approached cautiously, hand resting on his sidearm. The truck reeked of cheap beer and burnt oil. Inside the glove box was hanging open and empty. On the passenger seat, a torn-up photo. Ellie and a man Jack didn't recognize. Someone had scribbled across the man's face in red ink. Ranger sniffed the air, then growled. Jack followed the dog's lead into the woods just off the road. A trail of disturbed snow led through the trees. It wasn't clean. Whoever had gone this way was limping or dragging something. About 30 yards in, Jack spotted it, a body half buried in snow. He dropped to one knee. Caleb. But he was alive barely. Bruised, bloody, unconscious. And taped to his chest, soaked through with snowmelt, was a piece of paper scrawled in thick marker. "Ask her about Croft." Jack stared at the message. It was a setup or a warning. Either way, someone was pulling strings from deeper in the shadows. He tied Caleb's wrists, called in search and rescue again, then left him for pickup with coordinates. But now Jack's direction had shifted. He needed to find Croft, or whatever ghost of him still haunted the Bitterroot. They headed northwest back toward the burned cabin, following Ranger's nose and Jack's instinct. The path led them past ridgelines Jack hadn't walked in years. Old deer trails, forgotten mining roads. The deeper they went, the less the land felt like home and more like a memory refusing to stay buried. By nightfall, they reached a shack hidden between two massive stone outcrops. The kind of place someone chose not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they didn't want to be found. Jack approached, slow rifle in hand. Inside the shack was dimly lit by a battery lantern. Cans of food stacked neatly on shelves. A wood stove burning low. And there, sitting in a chair like he'd been expecting company, was a man with a face Jack had only seen in old photos. Older now, bearded, weathered, but unmistakably Croft. "Well," the man said, voice like gravel. Figured someone had come knocking sooner or later. Jack didn't lower the rifle. "You Garrett Croft?" "Depends who's asking. I'm Jack Vance, David's grandson." Croft grunted. "Figured. You've got the same stare. He used to call it a gift. I called it a curse." Jack stepped closer. "You were part of it. The land. The lies. Ellie." Croft sighed. "Kid, you think you're digging up some great conspiracy. It ain't that neat. Your granddaddy and I, we were soldiers. Did what we had to do. The Morgans had no paperwork. The government didn't care. So we took it. Ellie almost died. She should have died years ago by their standards. Your granddad tried to fix that mess. Signed over a slice, but Caleb, that boy's got rot in his soul. Wanted it all. Still does." Jack's voice was ice. "You left a message on him. Ask her about Croft." "Why?" Because Ellie knows more than she's telling. She knows who really drew that map, who owned that land before either of our families put up fences. Croft leaned forward, eyes sharp. You ever hear of Hollow Rock? Jack frowned. No. There's a mine entrance there. Closed in '78, sealed by order of your granddaddy, and buried in that mine is the real map. The one nobody was supposed to see. Jack took a breath, the pieces shifting again. And what happens if I find it? Croft smiled without humor. Then you'll learn the truth. And truth don't set anyone free out here. It gets people killed. He stood slow without threat. But if you're going after it, you'd better do it fast, because someone else already knows it's there. Jack stepped back, mind racing. Ranger stood at the doorway, growling softly. Croft added, if you want answers, Hollow Rock's where they start. Jack didn't wait for more. He turned and stepped out into the night, heart pounding. The next step wasn't justice. It wasn't even revenge. It was revelation. You don't hide something that deep unless it was never meant to be found. Jack stood at the edge of the Hollow Rock mine, staring into the black mouth of the mountain as wind sliced across the trees like razors. The entrance was sealed, or had been decades ago. Now rusted bolts dangled useless from the warped gate, and the boards covering the opening were split down the center, recently pried apart by a crowbar or sheer desperation. He stepped forward, shining his flashlight into the void. Cold air spilled out like breath from a long-dead beast. The beam barely pierced the darkness. Behind him, Ranger barked once, short and sharp. I know, Jack muttered. Doesn't feel right. But they had come too far to stop now. He ducked inside, crouching beneath splintered wood. The air grew instantly colder, damper. Ranger followed close behind his paw steps, muffled against the grit and broken rock. The shaft sloped downward deeper into the mountain's gut, the old support beams creaking faintly above them. Jack moved, slow eyes sweeping left to right, rifle slung tight across his chest. The mine hadn't seen sunlight in over 40 years, but someone had been here recently. Footprints in the dust, broken glass near the wall, a faint smell of sulfur and mold. They passed a rusted cart tipped on its side and then came upon a junction. A hand-painted sign still clung to the beam above it, barely legible, Surveyor's Tunnel. No entry. Jack stared at it. That's where they'd hide it. Ranger let out a low whine, pressing close to his side. Jack knelt down and rubbed his ears. You don't hide something that deep unless it was never meant to be found. They pushed forward, ducking through the narrow tunnel, flashlight bouncing against jagged rock walls. Water dripped from above in slow, rhythmic taps, echoing off the stone like whispers. Ranger suddenly stopped, ears twitching. Jack froze. A sound ahead, footsteps. He turned off the flashlight. Silence. Then a faint click, like metal on metal. Jack raised his rifle. Who's there? No answer, just breathing. Then a voice, calm, quiet male. You're too late. The flashlight snapped back on, and the beam caught movement, just a shadow at the far end of the tunnel. Then it vanished around the bend. Jack surged forward, boots crunching gravel. He rounded the corner into a wider chamber and stopped cold. There, lying in the dust, was a corpse. Fresh. Caleb Morgan. His face was frozen in terror, eyes wide, mouth open. But that wasn't what made Jack's gut clench. Pinned to his jacket was another note. This mine belongs to the dead. Stop digging. Jack lowered the light, scanned the walls. Their fresh scrape marks along the stone. A panel in the rock wall that didn't match the rest. He stepped over Caleb's body, ignoring the bitter bile rising in his throat. and pressed his hand to the panel. It moved. With a creak and a puff of old dust, a hidden alcove opened maybe no more than 10 feet wide, but packed with aged crates, oilskin-wrapped papers, and at the center, nailed to the wall, a canvas map. Jack's breath caught. It was older than any he'd seen. Ink faded. Hand-drawn lines tracing through Bitterroot Valley, none of them matching the boundaries marked on current maps. Names written in a script he barely recognized. Vance, Morgan, Blacktail. Even tribal markers, land once belonging to people who had no voice when the deals were made. This was the original claim map, proof, and a problem. Because if what it showed was real, then nearly every piece of property Jack's family had owned, including the land his cabin sat on, had been taken under false pretense. Jack stepped back, the weight of it sinking in. They didn't just lie. They rewrote the whole goddamn map. Ranger whined behind him, then growled. Jack turned and saw the shadow again. A figure stood just inside the tunnel they'd come through. Tall, lean, armed. He lifted the rifle, but the figure didn't move. "Don't," the voice warned. "You fire that thing down here, this whole place might come down on us." Jack kept the rifle aimed. "You kill Caleb. He wasn't supposed to follow me. Who the hell are you?" The figure stepped into the light. A man in his late 40s, bearded eyes sharp and sunken. Dressed like a hunter, but the military stance gave him away. "Name's Tom Blacktail," the man said. "This mine was my grandfather's before yours sealed it shut." Jack hesitated. "Why now? Why show up after all this time? Because my people have been erased off this land inch by inch. I got tired of waiting for the law to catch up." His voice was bitter. "You're the first Vance to come back here and not run." "I didn't come to take anything," Jack said. "I came to find out what the hell they did." Tom nodded toward the map. "Now you know, Jack eyed him carefully. "You torched the Morgan cabin too, no. But I wasn't sorry to see it burn." They stood in the thick silence of the mine ghosts pressing in from every wall. Jack lowered the rifle. "I want to make it right." Tom raised a brow. "You think that matters now?" "I don't know," Jack admitted. "But I'm not leaving this map here to rot. People need to see it." Tom stared at him for a long beat, then stepped aside. "Then you better move fast. There's more than one person who doesn't want that truth out." Jack took the map and a bundle of the supporting documents, wrapping them tight and sealing them in his pack. Ranger didn't move until Jack gave the nod, and they turned toward the shaft. But Tom's voice stopped him again. "Croft didn't tell you everything." Jack turned. "He never does. Your grandfather, he made deals with men dirtier than Croft. One of them's still around. And if you think Caleb was dangerous, wait until this one smells the smoke." Jack's grip tightened on the pack. Name Tom's mouth twitched. Raymond Shaw. Jack had never heard it before, but from the way Tom said it, he didn't have to. It was the kind of name that came with its own body count. They weren't trying to stop me from finding the truth. They were waiting for me to carry it out. Jack should have known the moment the snow started falling sideways. He and Ranger were barely a mile from the Hollow Rock mine when the wind kicked up hard, howling like it had teeth. The pack on Jack's back weighed heavier than it should have, not from weight, but from what it held. The map, the letters, the truth. His family's legacy rotten at the root. He glanced over his shoulder. The trees looked the same in every direction, but the hairs on his neck stood up like wires. Ranger paused ahead, body stiff, head low, tail flat. That was no ordinary storm. They were being watched. Jack ducked low behind a snow-draped rock, scanning the tree line. Nothing. No sound but the wind and the whisper of pine needles brushing against each other. Still, his pulse quickened. Then he heard it. A soft crunch of snow. Then another. Ranger gave a warning growl. Jack swung his rifle into position, just as the first shot rang out, snapping through the tree above his head, sending bark raining down. Ambush. He dropped flat and rolled, returning fire toward the muzzle flash he caught through the trees. Another shot cracked from his left. 2 shooters, maybe more. "Move!" he shouted at Ranger, who darted behind a fallen log. Jack crawled fast and low, ducking behind a boulder. Bullets whined past him, sharp and deliberate, not wildfire. Whoever was out here knew what they were doing. Not amateurs. Not Caleb's drunk cousins with bad tempers. Professionals. Jack fired 2 rounds to suppress, then took off at a sprint, using the slope to his advantage. He and Ranger cut through a draw, sliding half the way down. He hit hard, shoulder first rolled, and came up with the rifle ready, but the shooting had stopped. They weren't chasing. They didn't need to. Jack ducked under a deadfall and sucked in air. Ranger crept beside him, eyes locked on the ridgeline they'd come from. Jack reached into his pack and checked the waterproof seal on the documents. Still intact. Then he understood. "They weren't trying to stop me from finding the truth," he said aloud. "They were waiting for me to carry it out. That's why they didn't destroy the mine. Why Caleb hadn't burned those papers himself. Why Croft had warned him but never acted. Raymond Shaw didn't want the truth buried. He wanted it weaponized." Jack stood, heart hammering. They had to move. Now. If Shaw's men were this close, the window was closing. Ellie was safe in town for now, but if Shaw wanted her silenced, she was a loose end. Ranger gave a short bark and bolted ahead, following a trail Jack couldn't see but trusted with his life. They moved fast, cutting across a frozen creek, scrambling up a slope of shale and snow, ducking under branches heavy with ice. By the time they reached the edge of an old fire road, Jack's legs burned and his breath steamed heavy in the cold. That's when he heard the engine. Low. Rumbling. Too smooth to be some hunter's truck. A black SUV rolled into view, tires chewing the snow slowly like a predator circling a wounded animal. The windows were tinted. The plate was government-issued. Jack crouched behind a tree, lifting the rifle, but before he could aim, the SUV stopped. The passenger window rolled down halfway. A man leaned out. Mid-50s, trim, expensive coat, a smile like frostbite. "Mr. Vance," he called. Jack said nothing. "You're not easy to catch, but you're exactly where I need you." Jack stepped into view slowly, rifle still raised. "You, Shaw." The man's smile widened. "You're quick. That's good. I like quick. What do you want? What everyone wants." He shrugged. "Leverage. You have it. I need it. I'm not giving you a damn thing." "Oh, I'm not asking you to give it," Shaw said. "I'm asking you to sell it." Jack scoffed. "You sent men to kill me." "No, Jack. I sent men to follow you, to keep others from interfering." Shaw leaned an elbow on the window. "Croft's scared." Caleb was stupid. "But you're useful." Jack stepped closer. "You think I'll make a deal after what you did to Ellie?" To Caleb, Shaw's eyes twitched just slightly. Ellie was never supposed to be touched. That was Morgan's panic. And Caleb made his bed. Jack aimed. "Get out of that truck." "Why would I do that? Because the next time I see your face, it'll be through a scope." Shaw's calm broke for a split second. Then the door opened. He stepped out slowly, hands visible, still smiling, like he had an ace in his pocket. "You're angry." "I get it," Shaw said. But think, Jack. You're carrying a truth that could burn every deed in this valley to the ground. You really think the justice system's going to fix that? The courts, please. Jack didn't lower the rifle. You take that map public, you start a war. Not just with landowners, with history, with generations of dirty money and legacy claims. Maybe that's the point. Or Shaw said, stepping closer, you use it smart, quiet, leverage a few deals, settle debts, make change without the fire. Jack looked at him, then looked past him. Ranger was no longer at his side. Shaw noticed the shift too late. The dog lunged from the tree-line, teeth bared, hitting Shaw hard at the legs, knocking him sideways into the snow. Jack moved instantly, rifle still ready, boots crunching forward. Shaw rolled onto his back, eyes wide-winded. Jack stepped over him, rifle aimed straight at his chest. You don't get to rewrite this story. Shaw didn't smile now. You think they'll believe you, he spat. One vet and a dog standing up against land that built this entire town, Jack leaned in, voice low. I'm not standing up against the land. I'm standing up for it. He pulled a zip tie from his belt and cuffed Shaw's wrists. Ranger growled low, pacing nearby. Who else is in this with you, Jack asked. Shaw looked away. You're gonna tell me, Jack said, or you're gonna be the first name on a very long list. Sometimes it's not the enemy with the gun you need to fear. It's the friend with the key to the gate. Snow crackled beneath Jack's boots as he pushed forward, one hand on Shaw's shoulder, forcing him down the Forest Service road, with his wrists bound behind his back. The sun was bleeding out behind the Bitterroot Peaks, casting long shadows across the trail. Ranger trotted ahead, ears high, pace cautious. Jack's rifle hung across his back now, but the tension in his muscles hadn't eased an inch. Shaw walked without resistance, but that calm, shark smile had returned, like he knew something Jack didn't. You think this ends with me, Shaw said over his shoulder, voice too casual. You think taking me to the Rangers fixes anything? Jack didn't answer. He kept them moving, the radio in his coat buzzing intermittently with static. Earlier he'd called in the coordinates. A Ranger unit was en route to intercept. He just had to get there. You're not handing me over to justice, Shaw continued. You're handing me back to my friends, to the same people who buried that mine, the ones who hired me in the first place. Jack stopped cold. Shaw turned, slightly grinning. You think these forests are protected by saints? They're run by shareholders and legacy boards. The paper trail's clean, sure, but the dirt under their boots isn't. Jack tightened his jaw but kept moving. Keep talking. You're digging your hole just fine. They reached a narrow bend in the trail, and the faint sound of a chopper's blades started to grow in the distance, steady, deliberate. Jack activated his radio. Ranger Unit 1, this is Vance. Approaching intercept point. Subject in custody. There was a pause. Then a response, copy Vance. We see you. Hold position. The tone was clipped. Off. Jack frowned and slowed his pace. The chopper appeared over the treetops moments later, a standard Forest Service bird. Green and white. No insignia he didn't expect. It touched down in the clearing ahead with mechanical grace. But as the rotors slowed, the first man to step out didn't wear a ranger's uniform. Black tactical gear, sidearm exposed, earpiece in. Jack's stomach dropped. Shaw chuckled. Told you. Friends. The man in black approached with two others in tow, each armed and moving like they'd cleared rooms before breakfast. You, Jack Vance, the lead called out. Who's asking? We're here on behalf of the Department of Interior Security Task Force. You've got someone we need to debrief immediately. Jack didn't lower his rifle. Where's Ranger Unit 1? Redirected, the man said easily. Situation changed. Jack scanned them. Clean gear. Government tags. No names on the vests. No badges in sight. Ranger stood rigid beside him, growling low. I'm not handing over anything until I speak to a verified ranger, Jack said. And I want confirmation Ellie Morgan is secure. The man in black smirked. She's not your concern anymore. That was it. Jack grabbed Shaw and yanked him backward, rifle swinging up in a flash. Back off. Guns were drawn instantly. Stand off. Jack's heart pounded. You're protecting land theft, he snapped. You're protecting murder. You think some badge and a chopper makes it legal. You're in over your head, Vance, the man said. You're not a cop. You're a vet with a grudge and a dog. Jack's eyes didn't flinch. Then maybe it's time you remembered what we're trained for. The wind swirled around them, kicking snow across the standoff. For a moment, it felt like the entire mountain was holding its breath. Then from behind the chopper, another figure emerged, this one in the true Forest Ranger uniform badge clearly displayed. It was Dana Whitlock, Jack's old friend from the service turned regional ranger lieutenant. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. Guns down. Now. Everyone hesitated. I said lower your weapons, she barked. The agents hesitated but obeyed. Jack didn't move until he saw their fingers off the triggers. Dana strode between them, glaring at each man until she reached Jack. You've got a hell of a storm behind you, Vance. You've seen the files, she nodded once. Croft's been on our watch list. Shaw, too, unofficially. But no one ever stuck anything to them until now. Jack jerked his chin at Shaw. He's yours. Dana motioned, and her team moved forward, cuffing Shaw with fresh restraints and patting him down. Shaw didn't protest. He just looked up at Jack with that knowing grin. You may have the story, Vance, but I own the ending. Dana looked back at Jack. We'll get him to federal holding. You, however, need to disappear for a few hours. There's chatter. Someone higher-up's asking too many questions too fast. Jack nodded slowly, mind racing. Ranger nudged his hand. Dana leaned in. There's a contact. A woman named Isa Warren. She works in land conservation off the record. She's been fighting these bastards from inside. She knows how to move evidence without it vanishing. Jack raised a brow. She trusts you, no, Dana said. She doesn't trust anyone, but she hates Shaw's people more than you do. Jack glanced at the chopper. Where is she? 3 towns over. Abandoned ranger station at Mill Creek Ridge. Jack looked down at Ranger, then at the snow-covered woods beyond the trail. Then that's where we're headed. Dana handed him a sealed folder. Here. Her contact file. But be careful. If Shaw knew where you were going, she will too. And she's not alone out there. Jack slipped the folder into his coat. Appreciate the backup. Dana nodded once, and without another word, he disappeared back into the trees, Ranger by his side, both silent and swift as ghosts. Behind them, the rotors spun up again, and the forest swallowed the sound. But Jack could still hear the words Shaw whispered as they loaded him into the chopper. You think the mountain's the enemy. You haven't met the boardroom yet. You think secrets live in the ground. But the most dangerous ones walk around with names. The old ranger station at Mill Creek Ridge was a skeleton half-collapsed, windowless, and smothered in moss and snow, like the forest itself was trying to forget it ever stood. Jack approached from the tree line, his rifle strapped tight, Ranger staying low to his left. The place didn't look lived in, but it didn't look dead either. Smoke curled faintly from a steel chimney barely poking above the roofline. Someone's home, Jack muttered. Ranger gave a low rumble, not hostile, more like warning. Jack paused at the edge of the porch, listened. No voices, no movement. He knocked twice against the warped frame of the door. Silence. Then a click. A bolt sliding back. The door creaked open 2 inches, and a sharp eye appeared through the gap. The woman behind it didn't blink. "You, Vance?" she asked. Jack nodded. "You, Issa Warren." The door opened fully. Issa stepped back, rifle still in her grip, pointed toward the floor, but ready to rise. She was mid-30s, lean, sharp-eyed, wearing a flannel shirt under a canvas jacket patched a dozen times. Her boots were beat to hell. Her stare could have cracked granite. "You weren't followed, not unless they've figured out how to shadow a ghost," Jack said, stepping inside. The station smelled like smoke pine and old paper. Every surface was covered in maps, newspaper clippings, and photos pinned to walls and stacked in crates. Ranger padded in behind him and sniffed the air. Issa watched the dog. "That's Radar Ranger," Jack corrected. "But yeah, I've read about him." Jack raised an eyebrow. From where Issa turned toward a cluttered desk and pulled open a drawer, she handed him a file, his military file. "I've got eyes in places you wouldn't believe," she said. "You and that dog Fallujah 2010, Kandahar 2012. Then you disappear, reappear in the Bitterroots during the worst corruption probe the Valley's ever seen. That's not coincidence." Jack flipped through the file. "You tracking me or recruiting me depends what kind of man you are." Jack met her stare. "The kind who wants the truth, not a flag to wave." She nodded slightly. "Good, because flags don't mean much here." He dropped his pack on the table and pulled out the documents from the mine. Issa's eyes widened as he spread them out, the original land claim map, the tribal boundaries overwritten in red ink, the signatures linking it all back to David Vance and Croft's predecessors. "You've been sitting on this?" she asked, breathless. "Nearly got killed 3 times just carrying it." She studied the map, fingers tracing the ink like it might burn her. "You know what this means?" Jack nodded. "Everything these bastards built is on stolen ground." She looked up at him. "That includes the Vance family fortune." "I know." There was no pride in his voice, just a steady, cold understanding. Issa stepped back, paced, muttered to herself. This changes the entire conservation fight." "If we go public with this," Shaw knew about it, Jack interrupted. So did Croft. They didn't bury it because they were afraid of exposure. They were waiting for someone else to carry it out. "Use it." Issa went still. "Weaponize it. Use it to tear each other apart." "They already started," Jack said. "Caleb's dead. Croft's in hiding. Shaw's in custody, but not for long." Issa walked to the stove, poured 2 mugs of strong black coffee, and handed him one. She leaned against the wall and took a long sip before saying, "You think secrets live in the ground, but the most dangerous ones walk around with names." Jack looked up at her. "What do you mean?" She walked across the room to a locked cabinet, opened it with a key from around her neck, and pulled out a photo. 3 men, arms around each other, smiling in front of a lake cabin. Jack recognized 2 of them. David Vance, Ellison Croft. The third man was unfamiliar. Tall, stern, a dark fire in his eyes. Raymond Shaw, Jack guessed. Issa shook her head. "Worse. That's Mason Wilder. Architect. Developer. He's the one who funded the purchase of half the forest reserve back in the 80s under shell companies. He's not just a player. He's the one who gave the others their masks." Jack stared at the photo. "Is he still alive?" Issa nodded. "And still in the valley. Quiet, private, untouchable. Until now. Jack leaned on the table. So Shaw was a middleman. Issa smirked. Shaw's a puppet. Mason's the hand. Silence fell between them, heavy and hot like pressure before a storm. Ranger paced slowly around the room, then settled near the door. Jack drained his coffee. You have a plan. Issa walked back to her maps and pinned the original land claim over a blown-up satellite image of the valley. We need 3 things. 1, proof Mason is still controlling shell companies tied to these lands. 2, hard evidence tying those shell companies to the contracts used to evict indigenous families in the 90s. And 3, a voice. Someone to go public with this who can't be ignored. Jack frowned. Ellie Morgan. Issa nodded. If she's strong enough, she will be. Issa leaned forward. We have 1 shot, Jack. If we go early, they'll crush it. If we go too late, it'll vanish. Jack tapped the map. Then we hit them where it hurts legally, publicly, and if we have to, physically. Issa's eyes locked with his. You ready to burn your name down to the roots? I'm not my grandfather, Jack said, and I sure as hell didn't bury the truth. But I'll dig it out piece by piece until the whole damn valley sees what was built on bones. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the window frames. Ranger's ears perked up. Issa grabbed a pistol from the desk. We've got company. Jack moved to the window, rifle in hand. Headlights, 2 trucks approaching slowly from the lower trail. No markings. No plates. Jack glanced at Issa. You have a back exit. She nodded toward a trap door. But it only buys time. Jack slung his rifle. We don't need to run. We need to make them believe they're too late. Issa raised her pistol. Then let's give them something to fear. Some truths don't want to be found. They want to be buried with teeth. Snow crunched beneath heavy boots. Jack crouched low beneath the shattered window frame, rifle raised, breath held. Through the broken glass, he counted 2 silhouettes moving cautiously through the trees, tight formation, weapons up. Another pair flanked around the left, using the forest's cover. Professionals, not local muscle. Ranger pressed low beside him, body rigid, eyes locked forward. Issa knelt across the room, pistol ready, back against the old stone fireplace. Her eyes flicked to Jack. 4 minimum, she whispered. Maybe more on the ridge. Looks like they're sweeping, not storming. Issa's lips curled. They want the files, not a mess. Jack checked his mag. 1 full clip, back up in the coat. He gestured toward the floor trap door. Still our fallback. She nodded. Drops behind the station. Narrow crawl, single file. Jack glanced at Ranger. He fit barely. But yeah. The thud of a boot against the porch plank snapped their attention forward. One of the men spoke. Calm, even. We're here for documents, not blood. Jack rolled his eyes. Then maybe don't bring assault rifles to a house call. Another voice, closer this time. We know who you are, Mr. Vance, and we know what you have. That information isn't yours to decide. Jack stood slowly, just enough so they'd hear his voice through the cracked door. Funny. I thought this was still a free country. A beat passed. Then gunfire exploded, short bursts, testing fire aimed high to rattle. Plaster shredded above Jack's head. Ranger snarled, shifting beside him. Change of plan, Issa snapped. We hold them long enough to torch the backup and ghost out the crawl. Jack nodded. What about the originals? She pointed to the safe bolted beneath the floorboards. "You got 5 minutes. I'll distract." Before Jack could protest, Isa was already moving, shoving open a side door and firing 3 sharp shots into the tree line. Chaos erupted. Jack dashed to the safe, ripped up the trap door, and yanked out the fireproof satchel. Inside the tribal boundary map, Ledger copies correspondence with federal agents, everything that could burn down decades of fraud. He stuffed it deep into his coat and bolted toward the back hatch. Gunfire echoed outside. Ranger growled at the door. "No," Jack ordered. "With me." But Ranger didn't move. He stared at the open front where Isa had gone. "Damn it, Ranger, come still nothing." Then Jack realized Ranger wasn't disobeying. He was deciding. The dog let out one low bark and sprinted out the front just as a figure climbed the porch with a silencer raised. The man barely made it 2 steps before Ranger launched. Teeth clamped onto his arm, dragging him off balance. The suppressed shot went wide, pinging off the doorframe. Jack rushed to the entrance. Ranger. The dog and the intruder tangled in the snow, blood flashing dark against the white as the man screamed and struggled to break free. Another attacker emerged from the trees, weapon raised. Jack fired. 1 shot. Dead center. The man folded. He sprinted forward as Ranger tore free from the first man, who now rolled groaning in the snow. Jack leveled his rifle, but Ranger had already done the work. Behind them, Isa called out. 2 more coming from the ridge. Jack ducked behind the woodpile and spotted them, one with a scope, the other running a flank. 2 exposed. "Isa, back door, now!" "No," she shouted. "If they grab the safe, I've got it. Move!" She hesitated, then sprinted toward the back rifle covering her path. Jack turned back just in time to see the scoped shooter drop to a knee. He shifted, fired once. The bullet cracked through the window, shattering glass, where Jack had just been standing. Ranger growled and sprinted forward, not at the shooter, but up the slope, disappearing behind a stand of trees. "What the hell are you doing?" Jack tracked the shooter's position, waited for the silhouette to shift again. Then, movement. A branch snapped high above the shooter. Ranger's shape flashed through the trees, leaping from an upper slope right down onto the shooter from above. The rifle flew from the man's hands. Jack surged forward, firing at the second attacker trying to flank. 2 rounds. Drop. Ranger stood panting, blood flecking his muzzle, but the shooter beneath him was out cold. Jack grabbed the man's radio. "Status," a voice demanded on the other end. Jack held it to his mouth. "Truth's not bleeding tonight." "You are." He crushed it under his boot. Inside, Isa triggered the station's fire system. Smoke began to billow from vents along the rafters. Data drives set to incinerate in a controlled burn. The smell of scorched plastic filled the air. Jack met her at the rear exit. She looked shaken but unhurt. "Files are gone," he asked. "Everything but what you've got." They descended into the crawl space, Ranger limping slightly behind them, but determined. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and cold as a tomb. It opened out behind a cluster of fallen trees about 50 yards downslope. They emerged breathless, covered in ash and sweat. Jack scanned the woods. No movement. No reinforcements. For now. Isa turned to him. "That wasn't a cleanup squad. That was an erasure team." Jack nodded grimly. "They don't just want silence. They want forgetfulness." Ranger slumped beside them, still alert, but clearly bruised. Isa crouched and checked him over. "He's tough," she murmured. "He's more than that," Jack said. "He's the only reason we're not dead right now." From the ridge above, smoke poured into the sky. The old ranger station was gone. Erased, but not empty-handed. Jack pulled the satchel tight across his chest. They're escalating, Issa said. This isn't about land anymore. It's about legacy. Power. And they're willing to kill for both, Jack replied. She looked at him. So what do we do now? Jack turned his gaze to the valley below, the town lights flickering on as dusk settled. We go to the source, he said. Mason Wilder. Face to face. Issa didn't blink. That's suicide. Maybe. But the truth doesn't live in papers anymore. He glanced at Ranger. It's walking. And it's pissed. You don't negotiate with a man who builds his house on other people's graves. The mansion wasn't on any map. Perched atop a ridge that locals referred to in whispers as Widow's Peak, Mason Wilder's estate rose like a scar carved into the forest. It wasn't massive in scale, but it was fortress-like, angular, cold, all steel and reinforced timber, its architecture designed not for comfort, but for control. No neighbors, no roads marked publicly. The only approach was a one-lane service trail flanked by sensor towers and hidden cameras. Jack and Issa crouched behind a rock outcropping half a mile out, binoculars in hand. Ranger lay still between them, eyes fixed on the blinking red light near the eastern side of the property security node infrared sweep pattern. Issa lowered the binoculars. He built all this to stay hidden. Jack nodded. But not just hidden. Untouchable. They'd hiked 12 hours through dense frozen terrain using old fire breaks and poacher trails to avoid drone sweeps. Issa's contact had delivered a grainy satellite shot of the property last week, along with one note: Wilder doesn't leave. He waits for people to come to him. Jack studied the perimeter. 2 guards, maybe 3 inside. He'll have redundancy. Panic room escape tunnel. Surveillance on us before we get close. Jack glanced down at Ranger. Think you can disable the relay tower? Ranger gave a soft bark. Issa smirked. Your dog does tactical work now. He improvises. She handed Jack a flash drive. Get me inside into a terminal. I'll dump his personal files onto this. If we're lucky, we'll find the original land theft documentation, shell companies, transfers, all of it. And if we're not lucky, then we corner a predator in his den. Jack shifted his rifle strap. Time to knock. They split off, Jack and Ranger circling wide to the east ridge where the brush was thick and the sensor node was hidden low in a false rock. Jack located the power conduit and pulled the small EMP charge from his coat. 1 press. 3-second hum. The node sparked and went dark. A single red light blinked, then faded. At the same time, Issa moved like smoke through the forest edge, scaling the blind side of the exterior wall. Jack watched through his scope as she clipped into the second-floor balcony, picked the lock in under 10 seconds, and disappeared inside. He exhaled slowly. She's in. He waited 5 minutes, then approached the rear of the house. No lights, no movement. Ranger stayed tight to his leg, each step silent in the snow. Inside, the place was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that felt designed. Floors polished to a reflective sheen. Walls lined with minimalist art. Every piece was cold, sharp, black and white. Like Wilder didn't just reject color, he feared it. Jack found Issa in the study, crouched by a terminal built into a custom desk. She looked up, encrypted. But I'm close. Jack scanned the room. The bookshelves were fake LED lit and dustless. A cabinet was slightly ajar, revealing a stack of thumb drives labeled with indigenous tribal names. He pulled one out, Salish Kootenai Transfer A, 1993. He muttered, son of a bitch. Issa turned. Jack, look at this, On the monitor, a file opened legal documents with Wilder's signature on deeds tied to Blackthorn Energy Holdings, the parent company of Croft's old firm. Below that, scanned images of bribes paid to state officials, gag orders, and forced evictions. Jack stared. "It's the whole web." A voice echoed from behind them. "You're trespassing on private property. Federal jurisdiction does not apply here." They both turned. Mason Wilder stood in the doorway. He wasn't armed. He didn't need to be. He was the kind of man who walked into his own ambush with a smile. Late 60s, tall, dressed in a black wool coat over a gray suit, his silver hair combed back. His eyes were dead. Isa raised her pistol. "Don't move." Wilder didn't flinch. "You're Isa Warren, the girl from Clearwater who got kicked out of forestry for asking too many questions." She bristled. He turned to Jack. "And you, Vance's grandson. I knew you'd come. You've got your grandfather's eyes. And his arrogance." Jack stepped forward. "He didn't burn the records, did he?" Wilder's smile widened slightly. "No. He was going to. But he hesitated. Said the land spoke to him." "I speak louder," Isa cut in. "You built this empire on graves." Wilder finally looked annoyed. "No. I built it on opportunity. You think you're digging up justice, all you'll do is trigger a correction. The market, the media, they'll eat this story and spit it out in 3 days. Meanwhile, I'll build another compound 10 miles deeper." Jack stepped closer, gun lowered but voice hard. "You don't negotiate with a man who builds his house on other people's graves." Wilder studied him. "You're not here to negotiate." "No," Jack said. "I'm here to end it." Suddenly, Ranger growled. Wilder didn't move, but his eyes flicked to the corner. Jack turned just in time to see a shadow break from the hallway. A guard. Silent. Close. Jack fired once, hitting the man in the shoulder. He spun and collapsed. Wilder stepped backward toward the wall, pressing a panel. Jack raised his weapon. "Don't!" But the panel slid open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Wilder said nothing more. He disappeared into the stairwell. Jack bolted after him, Isa right behind, leaving Ranger to watch the wounded man. The stairwell spiraled deep into the earth. At the bottom, another door. Locked. Steel. Jack pulled out the thermite charge Isa had handed him earlier. "Hope he's not claustrophobic," he muttered, sparking the fuse. The explosion shook the tunnel. When the smoke cleared, they stepped into a private bunker lined with servers' safes and 3 monitors still active. Wilder sat calmly at the center desk, hands folded. "I suppose this is where I'm supposed to beg," he said. Jack aimed his rifle. "No. Just listen." They uploaded every file, every recording, every legal doc, and left him there surrounded by the very empire he'd built alone in the dark, with the lights going out one by one. Justice isn't the end. It's just the part where they start coming for you. The files hit the public domain at 3:42 a.m. By sunrise, Bitterroot County wasn't the same. The first wave came through social media screenshots, documents, contracts, and signatures connecting Mason Wilder, Ellison Croft, Raymond Shaw, and a chain of shell companies that stole land, silenced whistleblowers, and erased tribal boundaries with bureaucratic precision. By 8 a.m., major outlets were circling the story like vultures with satellite trucks. By noon, a congressional subcommittee was drafting subpoenas, but Jack knew better than to celebrate. He stood on the porch of Ellie Morgan's family cabin, now turned makeshift headquarters, watching the smoke curl from the chimney. Inside, Isa was on her 5th call with a state legal team trying to secure whistleblower protection. Ranger slept in the snow nearby, ears twitching and half-rest still guarding. Jack's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered without a word. A voice clipped and calm. You should have stayed a ghost. Click. No trace. No callback. No bluff. Issa stepped outside behind him, tucking her phone into her coat. That was DOJ. They're asking if we can testify on record. I told them yes. Jack stared at the tree line. Wilder's people won't wait for the courtroom. No, Issa said. They're going to hit back before we ever get there. And they did. That evening, Ellie's internet dropped. Cell service jammed. A dark SUV was spotted half a mile down the access road, just sitting. No lights. No movement. They went dark. Ellie lit candles and gathered her two younger cousins into the far bedroom. Issa locked every door and window. Jack stayed by the fire rifle across his lap. Let them come, he said. They're not the only ones who know how to finish something. The attack didn't come that night, nor the next. But it showed in other ways. An anonymous blog surfaced calling Issa a radical extremist with fake credentials. Jack's military record was leaked doctored to suggest desertion. A news site published a photo of Ranger with the headline "Dangerous Dog with Militant Ties." They weren't just erasing truth, they were replacing it. You ever think we made it worse? Issa asked on the third night. She sat on the floor, back against the wood stove, boots off, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Jack leaned against the opposite wall. Truth never fixes things. It just forces people to look. Issa shook her head. You're supposed to feel better after justice. Jack's voice was quiet. Justice isn't the end. It's just the part where they start coming for you. She looked at him. You're not wrong. There was a beat of silence, then a knock at the door. Both stood instantly, weapons drawn. Ranger growled low, rising beside them. A second knock, slower. Jack signaled for Issa to flank the window. He opened the door a crack and saw a familiar face. Caleb. The young man was pale eyes, bloodshot hands shaking. He held up a flash drive. I stole it from the backup server at the county courthouse. Wilder had more contracts for oil rights under tribal land. They were waiting to flip it after the next election. Billions. Jack pulled him inside. Issa locked the door behind them. Caleb collapsed into a chair. They don't care about exposure. They're betting on exhaustion. They know people forget fast. Jack took the drive. Then we can't give them time. They uploaded the new files to an offshore server Issa had arranged months earlier. That night, they did interviews with independent journalists, uploaded videos of their findings, and shared testimonies from displaced tribal elders. It went viral. Again. But this time, so did the threats. A Molotov cocktail hit a tribal legal aid office 2 towns over. Ellie's family truck was found burned out near the trailhead, and someone mailed a bullet to Issa wrapped in a copy of the Bitterroot Valley Gazette. This is war, Issa said the next morning, staring at the paper. Jack didn't reply. He was already packing. Where are you going? She asked. He slung his rifle and patted Ranger's side. To draw the fire. If they want to finish this, they can do it in the open. You walk into a trap, we lose everything. No, he said. You keep pushing the truth. I'll keep them busy. Issa stepped forward. I'm not letting you turn this into some martyr story. Jack looked at her, calm and steady. This isn't about me. It never was. That night, Jack drove east toward Wilder's last known corporate, holding a logistics compound hidden behind a fake lumber company near Lolo Pass. He didn't go to kill. He went to bait. He triggered the motion detectors, disabled one security camera, then let the others catch his face clearly. He left behind a handwritten note on the compound gate. "Let's finish this like men." He didn't look back. As he disappeared into the forest with Ranger at his side, Isa watched from a distance, hidden in the tree line, the sat phone in her hand buzzing. It was Ellie. "They're going after Jack." Isa closed her eyes. "I know." Ellie's voice was urgent. "If we're going to stop this, it has to be now. Not with another file drop, with something that makes them bleed in court, in public." Isa looked toward the tree line where Jack was already gone. "Then we make them feel the cost." The gate to Wilder's compound creaked open like a coffin lid. Jack Vance walked through it alone, snow settling silently on his shoulders. No rifle, no backup. Just his coat, a satchel slung across his back, and Ranger padding close by the dog's eyes, alert body tense. Cameras above the entrance tracked him. He didn't flinch. In the center of the yard stood Mason Wilder. No guards flanked him this time. No pretense of authority or empire. Just an old man in a dark coat waiting in the middle of the land he stole. "You came," Wilder said. Jack didn't stop walking until they were 6 feet apart. "You knew I would." Wilder studied him. "You're not here to kill me." Jack glanced around. "If I wanted that, you'd already be dead." "Then why are you here to give you a choice?" Jack said. He opened the satchel and pulled out a worn leather ledger. The last copy. "Originals, handwritten. Your father's first transfers. Your name on the deeds. The story you tried to bury started with your bloodline." Wilder stared at the book. "I burn it," Jack continued, "and you go free. You walk back into the world with whatever face you can afford to wear. But it'll all rot. Slowly. Or I leak it. Every last page. Tribal archives, public records, global press. You won't just fall, you'll get devoured. Your name, your company, your grandchildren. It'll stain every dollar you ever touched." Wilder's mouth twitched. "You think I care about legacy? I think that's the only thing left keeping you warm at night." Wilder stepped closer. "You brought a dog and a book to a war." "No," Jack said. "I brought a mirror. Look at it." He held the ledger out. Wilder hesitated, then reached for it. The second his fingers touched the cover, Jack spoke again. "But here's the part you won't understand until it's too late. This story was never about you." A crack echoed behind them. Wilder flinched, turning instinctively toward the sound. Isa stepped out of the shadows at the edge of the compound, flanked by Ellie Caleb and 2 tribal elders. A convoy of unmarked vehicles rolled up the drive. Reporters spilled out. Federal agents, civil rights attorneys, live-stream drones hovered into view. "You think you built a kingdom," Isa said, her voice loud and clear. "But all you built was a cage you called a throne." Jack dropped the ledger to the ground. A younger agent picked it up with gloves and sealed it in a case. Another officer approached Wilder, quietly reading him his rights. Wilder didn't resist. He just looked at Jack, hollow-eyed, the fight drained. "You think you've won?" Jack looked past him toward the tree line, toward the miles of stolen earth beneath their feet. "No," Jack said. "I think we've started." As Wilder was led away, Jack felt the tension bleed out of his shoulders. Isa joined him, glancing down at Ranger. The dog sat calmly watching the agent's work, tail twitching in the snow. "He never flinched," she said. "He's done this before," Jack replied. Weeks passed. The hearings began. The files Jack and Issa recovered led to over a dozen federal investigations. Wilder's empire unraveled in public view, land seized assets, frozen allies arrested. Tribes across the Bitterroot region filed restitution claims with decades of evidence to back them. But not everything made the news. Ellie's family started a foundation to help displaced Native families reclaim lost land. Caleb became a digital archive, preserving oral histories that had been suppressed for generations. Issa took a full-time role at a Truth and Reconciliation task force built by survivors for survivors. And Jack, he didn't go back to the cabin. Instead, he helped rebuild one. Sarah's old homestead, the cabin she was imprisoned in, was restored on tribal land, not as a residence but as a memorial and resource center. A place for healing, for remembering. On the first day of spring, Jack stood on its new porch, watching kids from the reservation paint a mural across the side wall. Ranger lay at his feet, older now, content. Issa walked up beside him, a mug of coffee in her hands. "You finally staying in one place?" she asked. Jack shrugged. "I'm still learning what that means." She smiled. "Feels like the right place to try." The sun broke through the clouds. The snow, once so heavy and endless, had started to melt. In the distance, pine trees swayed in a warm wind. Jack looked down at Ranger. "You saved us all." You know that Ranger didn't respond, but his tail thumped once. Jack looked out at the valley, the land he once tried to escape, the ghosts he used to silence with whiskey and solitude. Now he listened to them. Let them speak. Because some silences weren't meant to last forever. The last scene fades to a plaque at the entrance of the cabin in honor of those who were silenced and those who spoke anyway. Justice is not about erasing the past. It's about making sure no one buries it again. And just beyond that, a weathered trail sign points to a winding path into the forest. The Ranger's path. A legacy not of power, but of purpose.